They saw an old woman fixing her van outside a military base, worn clothes, tired hands, skin stained with grease. So they laughed. They questioned her. And when she showed her military ID, they called it fake. But then, a 4-star general stepped out of his SUV, saw the faded tattoo on her forearm, and snapped to attention with a perfect salute. Who was she? Why had the military tried to erase her? And what secret had been buried for nearly 50 years? This isn't just a story about injustice. It's a story about what happens when history tries to forget, and one woman refuses to be silent. Stay with us. The July sun scorched the pavement outside Fort Liberty as a battered, military-modified van wheezed to a stop near the base gate. The engine coughed, then died altogether, hissing like it was just as exhausted as the woman behind the wheel. Eleanor Watkins, 62 years old, wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of grease across her dark skin. Her hands, calloused, scarred, and stronger than they looked, reached under the hood with quiet focus. She looked out of place, and that was the point. Her clothes were simple: a faded flannel shirt, work boots, jeans smeared with oil. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back tight, and her face, though lined with age, carried the steadiness of someone who had seen far worse than a broken-down van. But the guards didn't see that. All they saw was an older black woman hunched over a suspicious-looking vehicle just outside a restricted military entrance. Within minutes, the sound of heavy boots echoed on the pavement. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am," one of them barked. 3 young military police officers, all white, all barely shaving, closed in, hands twitching near their holsters. Ellie didn't flinch. She straightened slowly, joints stiff from both age and old injuries, and gave them the kind of look that didn't ask for permission. "Good afternoon, officers," she said calmly, her southern accent carrying a quiet dignity. "Just a bit of engine trouble. I'll be out of your way shortly." The tallest one, a corporal named Lewis, narrowed his eyes. "This area is off limits. I'll need to see some ID." Ellie nodded and reached toward the driver's side window to retrieve her purse. She moved deliberately, not because she was slow, but because she knew better than to startle young men with guns and assumptions. She handed over 2 cards, a driver's license and a worn military ID. The corporal squinted. "Colonel Eleanor Watkins? 30 years of service?" He glanced at her, then at the ID, then back again and smirked. Behind him, the second MP leaned in. "Could be fake. We've had folks using fake IDs to sneak onto base, especially with a van like that." The third officer circled the vehicle slowly, peering through windows. "Modified tires, reinforced chassis, auxiliary fuel tank. That's no ordinary camper." Ellie folded her arms. "I bought this van legally when I retired. Surplus. Everything's documented." But they weren't listening. "You'll need to step back, ma'am," Corporal Lewis said again. "Backup is en route. We're going to inspect the vehicle." Ellie didn't move. Not yet. Instead, she stood firm, shoulders square, spine straight, the posture of someone who had once commanded men twice these boys' size in places far more dangerous than a Georgia parking lot. "Young man," she said coolly, "I've been through this before, more times than you can count, but this time I suggest you radio your superior before things get out of hand." It was the kind of sentence that wasn't loud, but still stopped people in their tracks. Lewis hesitated, clearly unsure, but he didn't have to wait long. Moments later, the crowd parted as a black government SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors opened, and out stepped a man whose very presence silenced the pavement: General Marcus Caldwell, 4-star commander of Fort Liberty. All eyes turned to him. He didn't speak, not at first. He simply stepped toward Ellie, then froze when he saw her sleeve had rolled up just enough to reveal a faded tattoo on her forearm. It wasn't a unit number, it wasn't decorative. It was a Black Panther, mid-stride, with a string of numbers etched beneath it. The general's face went pale, his expression blank, then confused, then reverent, shifted. Then he did something no one, especially not the 3 young MPs, expected. He stood at attention and saluted. The officers stared in disbelief. General Caldwell's voice was low, but firm. "Colonel Watkins, ma'am, it's an honor." And just like that, the entire energy of the situation changed. The same woman they were seconds from detaining, mocked, doubted, surrounded, was now being saluted by the highest-ranking officer on the base. But Ellie didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply returned the salute with slow, precise perfection. Behind her eyes, though, something flickered. Pain, history, memory. Because this wasn't the first time she'd been mistaken for someone insignificant. It might be the last. For a moment, no one said a word. The scorching heat, the buzzing insects, the stiff Georgia wind, everything faded under the weight of that salute. General Marcus Caldwell stood like a statue, eyes locked on the tattoo on Ellie Watkins's forearm, the Black Panther etched with years, half faded but unmistakable. A mark he had only heard whispers about in dark corners of old war rooms. Corporal Lewis blinked in disbelief. "General? Sir? Is everything all right?" General Caldwell didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching the gravel as if it were sacred ground, then lowered his salute with controlled grace. "I need you three to stand down," he said firmly. "This woman is not a threat. She's a decorated officer, one of the most important veterans to walk this base in decades." The young MPs exchanged glances, stunned. They didn't understand, not yet, but they obeyed. Caldwell turned to Ellie, his voice quieter now. "Ma'am, is everything okay with your van?" Ellie gave him a look that mixed respect with weariness. "Just a loose connection. She always acts up in July. I'll get her going in a few." Caldwell hesitated, then offered, "I can have the motor pool take care of it." "I appreciate that," Ellie said, kneeling back down to the open hood, "but I'd rather do it myself." And so, with the highest-ranking officer on base standing just feet away, and 3 stunned MPs trying to process what they'd just witnessed, Colonel Eleanor Watkins got back to work, calm, quiet, deliberate. There was something unshakably dignified about the way she worked. Her hands moved with precision. Despite arthritis and age, she still had the muscle memory of someone who used to rebuild engines in the dead of night, under enemy fire. Every motion was smooth, intentional. At first, the bystanders thought it was just odd. Then they noticed more. The way she diagnosed the issue, without second-guessing. The way she rerouted a loose line using nothing but a utility knife and a strip of cloth from her sleeve. The way she adjusted the ignition like she had done it 1,000 times before. This wasn't some random senior with a DIY van. This woman knew her machine like a soldier knows her rifle. Behind her, General Caldwell stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back, like a man in the presence of something sacred. "You know," he finally said to the MPs, his voice low, "when I was a cadet, I heard stories about a unit so secret, most of the brass pretended it never existed." Lewis swallowed hard. "A unit, sir?" Caldwell nodded slowly. "They called it Shadow Legion, all-black special operations, Vietnam era, highly classified. Rumor was they handled missions the regular forces couldn't or wouldn't." The second MP, Torres, frowned. "But I thought that was just a myth." Caldwell gave a dry laugh. "That's the point. They made it a myth. Easier to erase what you don't want people to remember." He looked down at Ellie again, who had now fired up a small diagnostic reader from the van's console. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word. "She was one of them?" Lewis asked. Caldwell didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer and said, "Colonel Watkins, do you still have your identification?" Ellie reached into her pocket and handed it to him without glancing his way. He examined the military ID with care. 30 years of service, he read aloud, his tone reverent. Combat engineer, special operations liaison, commanded field units in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe. He paused. Retired honorably, but no medals listed. He turned it over. No commendations, no honors, not even a campaign badge. Caldwell looked up, eyes narrowing. "That's not an oversight," he muttered. "That's a purge." Finally, Ellie stood, wiping her hands with a rag, grease streaking her sleeves. She met his gaze for the first time. "They didn't want people asking questions," she said quietly. "Questions about why a black unit had the highest mission success rate during Vietnam, but didn't officially exist." One of the MPs blurted out, "So, they just deleted you?" Ellie didn't blink. "Not the first time history forgot us, won't be the last. But some things," she said, placing her hand over the panther tattoo, "you carry with you." Caldwell took a slow breath. "I think it's time people knew." Ellie looked him over. "You willing to push that up the chain, General?" He nodded. "More than willing." But before anything more could be said, the radio on Lewis's shoulder crackled. Base command to all units near Gate 4, increased alert level. Report suspicious individuals near restricted perimeter. Orders from Colonel Reese. Ellie's eyes narrowed. Reese? He's still commanding this base? Caldwell's jaw tightened. Unfortunately, yes. And if he heard about this interaction, he's already moving to cover tracks. Ellie reached into the back of her van, pulled out a small leather-bound pouch, and tucked it into her coat. Then we'd better move fast. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. Move fast for what? She looked at him, calm but with something simmering just beneath. You wanted to know the truth, General? You better be ready to dig through everything they buried, because they didn't just erase our names. She nodded toward the base. They erased bodies, operations, files, evidence, and if someone's spooked enough to raise an alert, that means they know exactly what I'm carrying. Caldwell blinked. You brought documents? Ellie stared at him. I brought memories, she said. And memories, they don't fade when you've lost 17 brothers and sisters in silence. Without another word, she slid back into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered, then purred, smoother than it had in years. And as she drove toward the gate under escort, General Caldwell walked beside her van, step for step, not as a superior, but as a witness. Something was changing. The silence around Shadow Legion had lasted for nearly 5 decades. But now, for the first time, someone was listening. Ellie Watkins walked beside General Marcus Caldwell through the inner gates of Fort Liberty like a ghost returning to the living. She didn't look left or right. She didn't wave or speak, but the air around her shifted. People noticed. Junior officers paused mid-step. Enlisted men who had never seen a woman her age in military fatigues, let alone one being personally escorted by a 4-star general, whispered behind coffee mugs. And when they caught a glimpse of that Black Panther tattoo peeking from under her rolled sleeve, they stared longer than they should have. Inside Caldwell's private conference room, he locked the door behind them. We don't have much time, he said. If Colonel Reese or anyone tied to command catches wind of what you're carrying, they'll make this disappear. Ellie opened the leather pouch. Inside were photographs, faded, yellowed, but clearly real. Groups of black soldiers in unmarked uniforms. A woman younger, sharper in the face, standing in front of a helicopter with no insignia. Men with grim smiles, battle-weary eyes, rifles slung over their backs. One of them had his arm draped across Ellie's shoulder. His name was Marcus Williams, Ellie said softly. Colonel, we called him Ghost Leader. He founded Shadow Legion after 3 conventional units failed to extract American POWs along the Cambodian border. Caldwell studied the photo. That operation's not in any official record. Ellie let out a hollow chuckle. Of course not. That was the point. She spread out more. Hand-drawn maps, after-action reports, redacted casualty lists, each one bearing dates and coordinates, but no official unit name. They made us invisible, she said, because we succeeded where others failed, because the idea that an all-black special operations unit could outpace white counterparts, that wasn't acceptable back then. Caldwell shook his head slowly. And they just buried everything? Buried the missions, reassigned the glory, lost our medals in administrative error. And when we asked questions, she held up a folded paper, they handed us early retirement and silence agreements. He picked it up and read, Non-Disclosure Agreement, Operation Thunderbird, the 14th of November, 1973. His hands went cold. Thunderbird? I've heard of that. Only in rumors. It was supposed to be a weapons recovery mission in northern Vietnam, classified above top secret. Ellie nodded grimly. Because we recovered more than weapons. We found proof documents, recordings that high-ranking officers were diverting arms to third-party groups and pocketing the profits. Treason, Marcus. That's what Shadow Legion stumbled onto. And they left you behind. We made it to the extraction point, waited 36 hours. No helicopters, no radio contact, no backup. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. We fought our way out, lost 11, buried them ourselves when we got back. Caldwell couldn't speak. Ellie leaned closer. They didn't just erase us because we were black. They erased us because we knew too much. And now, they're scared we've come back. Before he could respond, his aide knocked sharply. Sir, you need to see this. They moved to Caldwell's office, where a laptop was open on the desk. On screen, a leaked article from a national news site. The Forgotten Ghost Unit, secret records suggest US used undocumented Black Ops team during Vietnam. Byline: Rachel Lynn, military affairs journalist. Ellie blinked. Rachel Lynn, that's... Caldwell nodded. Lieutenant Harper's college roommate. She tipped her off. Ellie's stomach twisted. That'll bring heat fast. Too late to stop it now, Caldwell said. The story's spreading. Shadow Legion isn't a whisper anymore. It's a name people are Googling. Just then, the door burst open. Colonel Reese stormed in, 2 base security officers behind him. General Caldwell, Reese barked, red-faced. You are housing a civilian in a classified zone, sharing secure records without authorization, and facilitating a media leak. She's not a civilian, Caldwell cut in, calm but sharp. She's Colonel Eleanor Watkins, 30 years decorated service, and the former operations commander of a unit you've likely pretended never existed. Reese scoffed. Shadow Legion, urban legend, no proof it was ever real. Ellie stepped forward, quietly sliding the photos onto the desk in front of him. That's me, Colonel. That's Marcus Williams. That's Operation Thunderbolt. Want coordinates? Reese's smirk twitched. Even if that's true, those operations are still classified. You're breaking federal law. No, Caldwell snapped. We're exposing decades of corruption, starting with how your command has been actively suppressing records. Reese turned to the guards. Escort this woman off base. Detain her if necessary. Neither man moved. Instead, the younger officer, black, early 30s, looked at Ellie. His eyes widened. He glanced at her tattoo and froze. Wait, he said. My uncle told me about this. He served in Nam. He said there was a woman with a panther tattoo who saved his unit when all hope was lost. He turned to Reese. She's real, sir? And then, for the second time that week, a uniformed officer saluted Eleanor Watkins. Not because he had to, but because he meant it. The room went silent. Even Reese couldn't speak. Ellie looked at the young officer and nodded. Tell your uncle he wasn't crazy. We were real, and we never stopped watching. Behind her, Caldwell stepped forward. This base has stood on silence for too long. Shadow Legion deserves a voice, and this woman deserves more than a salute. He placed a call. Get me the Pentagon. Now. 3 days later, the old auditorium at Fort Libertions, used for safety briefings and change of command ceremonies, was standing room only. Uniforms of every color lined the seats. Old veterans with walking canes, young recruits standing tall, unsure of what to expect, journalists whispering into their recorders, commanding officers in full dress, eyes darting with tension. At the front of the room, a row of chairs had been set for 6 people, General Caldwell, Lieutenant Harper, and 4 others, Colonel Eleanor Watkins, Command Sergeant Major James Wilson, Colonel David Thompson, and Major Robert Jackson. The last living members of the Shadow Legion. Ellie sat straight-backed in her uniform. It didn't quite fit like it used to, but somehow, that made it more powerful. Her face held no bitterness, just clarity. General Caldwell stepped to the podium first. Thank you for being here, he began. This is not a press conference. This is a reckoning. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. For nearly 5 decades, a unit of elite soldiers operated in the shadows, completing missions deemed impossible. They did so without recognition, without medals, and without backup. They were erased not because they failed, but because they succeeded while being black. You could hear a pin drop. These men and women were sent into fire and never welcomed back. Today, we say, enough. Caldwell turned to Ellie. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate. My name is Colonel Eleanor Watkins, she said into the microphone. I served for 30 years, but for 47 years, part of me stayed behind in a jungle where they left us. We didn't die there, not all of us, but something was taken. She held up a photograph. It was the same one from the leather pouch the group of Shadow Legion operatives standing before a helicopter in the mud. These are my brothers and sisters. 17 of them didn't make it out. 15 more died in silence, suicides, overdoses, disappearances. They lived with ghosts and carried shame that didn't belong to them. She looked out at the sea of faces. And why? Because they had the audacity to succeed while black? Because we uncovered truths some men didn't want known? A quiet rustle ran through the crowd. The shame didn't just belong to old officer, it clung to the entire institution. But I'm not here for revenge, she continued. I'm here because silence is complicity, and history is not a luxury we can afford to rewrite. At the side of the stage, a representative from the Pentagon stepped forward. In accordance with directive signed by the Secretary of Defense and approved by the President, she announced. The United States military formally recognizes the Shadow Legion as an operational special forces unit. All 37 missions are being unsealed and properly attributed. She read the names every fallen soldier, and as she did, officers throughout the room stood, one by one. Posthumous medals were approved. Commendations reinstated. An official Shadow Legion memorial would be erected at Arlington. But Ellie's reaction was not triumphant. It was quiet, measured. Later that afternoon, she stood alone in front of the freshly cleaned van, the same vehicle they'd questioned her over, the same one that carried decades of silence. Lieutenant Harper approached with a soft smile. "Ma'am, your van is ready. We added a new alternator, by the way, just in case." Ellie chuckled. "She's stubborn, but so am I." She opened the driver's door, then paused. A group of younger black soldiers stood nearby, unsure whether to speak. One of them, a young woman barely in her 20s, stepped forward. "Colonel Watkins," she said with a crisp salute, "we read everything. Your story, the missions, Shadow Legion. We had no idea." Ellie returned the salute. "You weren't supposed to." "But now we do," the young woman replied, her voice shaking, "and we're going to make sure no one forgets again." Ellie smiled not wide, but full. That's all we ever wanted. She climbed into her van. This time, she didn't drive alone. Behind her, 4 military vehicles followed: General Caldwell's staff car, a van with the remaining Legion members, a jeep with journalists, and one filled with active-duty soldiers who had never heard of Shadow Legion until this we know their biggest supporters. As the small convoy passed through the base gates, the MPs, the same ones who once questioned her, stood in full formation, saluting in silence. No applause, no ceremony, just respect. Just truth. Later that week, a national broadcast aired a short documentary segment about Shadow Legion. In it, Colonel Watkins appeared briefly on screen. No music, no dramatics, just her voice. "We didn't wear capes. We wore patches no one ever saw. We didn't want statues. We wanted names engraved. We didn't need parades. We needed to be remembered. Because some heroes don't want recognition, but they deserve it anyway. History doesn't always forget on its own sometimes. It's forced to. But the story of Colonel Eleanor Watkins and the Shadow Legion reminds us that silence is never the end. Their courage didn't stop at the battlefield. It continued through decades of quiet resilience, of being ignored, dismissed, and erased, until one woman stood up and said, "No more." This isn't just military history. It's American history, and it belongs to all of us. Have you ever witnessed someone's legacy being overlooked, or had to fight for your own story to be told? Comment below with your thoughts, and let us know, what kind of story would you like to see next? Forgotten heroes, hidden missions, or moments where justice came decades late but arrived with dignity? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes the truth should never stay buried. We have more untold stories coming, and we'd love for you to be part of the journey.